There are a couple of different ways TV shows can be formatted. Either each episode operates as its own separate entity, or it can function like a long movie with each episode directly affecting what happens in the next one. However, there is another method that's used quite often, particularly in cartoons, which is what's known as negative continuity, which simply means that, unlike other kinds of TV shows that try to show at least some form of progression, whether subtly or overtly, TV shows that rely on negative continuity always have things revert back to the status quo at the start of the next episode, no matter how the previous one ended. And needless to say, in these cases it's very rare for anything in a given episode to have any effect on what comes after, with the most notable exceptions generally being when a new reoccurring character is introduced. So in these kinds of shows, the only true continuity is anything that's firmly established to have happened before the series takes place, and not much else. But all of this then begs the question, how does a format like that really work? And can a TV show based off negative continuity really be as good as other kinds of shows if nothing matters from episode to episode? And today, I'd like to try and answer these questions to the best of my ability. And there might be minor spoilers for a couple of TV shows or individual episodes ahead. So in case there's something you don't want ruined, you might just want to be on the lookout. Okay, so just to get one thing straight first, in my video, Did Streaming Kill TV Shows?, which you can find a link in the description to, I describe at length how early TV had a habit of one episode having no bearing on the next, so that people wouldn't have to watch the episodes in order. But that isn't exactly the same as negative continuity, because while those early shows did that sometimes, in those cases it was a lot more about one episode just not affecting the next, rather than almost every episode deliberately ignoring the events of the previous one. To put it simply, Lisa Simpson describes negative continuity extremely well in the Simpsons episode Homer Loves Flanders. It seems to me like every week something odd happens to The Simpsons. My advice is to ride it out, make the occasional smart aleck quip, and by next week we'll be back to where we started from, ready for another wacky adventure. And that pretty much describes what happens on The Simpsons in a nutshell. No matter what actually happens in a given episode or is established, by the next one they'll always be right back where they started. In fact, the infamous episode The Principal and the Pauper was actually made to parody this concept. Specifically, how TV shows that don't use negative continuity will often go to ridiculous lengths to get things back to normal by the end of the episode. Only, it didn't turn out so well in part because The Simpsons uses negative continuity, meaning it doesn't have to tie up the loose ends of a given episode for things to go back to normal, making the parody feel kind of lost. Though their most obvious uses of negative continuity has to come from the Treehouse of Horror specials. Or just to drive the point home, another good example is an episode of Phineas and Ferb where everybody but Candace is turned into babies at the end, and after a moment of being flustered, she simply replies, "They better be back to normal by the next episode," and that's just how it ends. And sure enough, the next episode starts and everything is normal, same as usual. Now, while most of the time on this particular show, loose ends are usually tied up within each given episode, there are occasions where things are left hanging or uncertain without a resolution, but never has any bearing on the following episode, with rare exceptions, of course. And on that particular occasion, the writers are basically acknowledging outright that they don't have to explain how the process was reversed and that everything will simply be normal the next time it airs without any explanation. And that's pretty much the best way to explain how the whole thing works. Kenny constantly dying in each episode of South Park, yet always being alive and well in the next one, only to die again, is another good example of this, if one that was eventually given something of a canon explanation. Now, the reason that negative continuity is so popular in cartoons is mainly for two reasons. First off, when a show is simply about exploring the adventures of certain characters in an episodic format, the writers don't want to beholden themselves to everything that happens in each episode, so they simply ignore what happens and treat each and every episode as its own entity. And the second reason is because that's honestly how cartoons have been formatted for most of their existence. If you go back to the golden age of animation, all of the classic cartoons, such as Mickey Mouse, Looney Tunes, Popeye, Tom and Jerry, and any other popular characters you can think of, one short never had anything to do with another, with some even outright contradicting each other. For example, in some shorts, Jerry is an alley mouse desperate for food, and in others he's been robbing an unknowing family blind for years, with only Tom trying to stop him. Or for an even more extreme example, most of their shorts take place in the present, but for some reason some shorts also take place in the 19th century France, or even in the time of Robin Hood. And what was the writer's reason for this? Because they just wanted to come up with the funniest scenario for the characters possible on any given day, and negative continuity gave them virtually limitless possibilities in that regard. And this is true even more so for Looney Tunes, because not only did every short stand as its own independent entity, but the same went for the characters as well. Because many have questioned why it seems so difficult for writers to have all the different Looney Tunes characters cross over and interact with each other. And this mainly comes down to the fact that even though they are all Looney Tunes characters, they were never meant to interact together. As I got into in my video on Looney Tunes, which you can also find a link in the description to, each character had their own set of plots, scenarios, and things that made them individually funny. So it can be very difficult to mix all those styles together into something coherent when trying to have all these characters interact. Though, that being said, there have been some things to handle this pretty well, such as Looney Tunes Back in Action, which smartly doesn't have all the characters interact at the same time, and instead tailors certain situations to fit specific characters. But the point is, classic Looney Tunes, just like pretty much all other classic cartoons, ran on extreme negative continuity, mainly because there was absolutely no way to watch the cartoons in any given order, as well as to ensure that each individual cartoon could be as funny as possible with absolutely no restrictions whatsoever. But more modern cartoons that follow this format can be a little jarring to those who are more used to TV shows at least trying to tie up loose ends within an episode, or do make small, passing references to what came before. For example, Dexter's Laboratory can be a bit odd when it comes to this, as episodes often end with extreme consequences or no way out scenarios, and yet the next episode treats it all as if it never happened. And again, this can be especially odd in more extreme examples, such as when the Earth is literally destroyed by a bunch of meteors, but nothing ever becomes of it once the episode ends. And the reason this can be strange is because one wouldn't expect a series about a boy genius with a secret laboratory to have such extreme things happen within each episode and then just never acknowledge them again. Especially because these extreme circumstances aren't always played for laughs. And this is particularly evident when compared to the similarly themed Jimmy Neutron, which rarely ends an episode without somewhat tying things up, and was no stranger to acknowledging or even building off of things that happened in previous episodes. And again, because most would be inclined to see Dexter's Laboratory the same way, it can feel very odd that it uses negative continuity to such an extreme. Because, once again, there's a difference between one episode having no bearing on the next and negative continuity, since one is generally just self-contained, while the other blatantly ignores what happened previously, no matter how it ended. But once again, TV shows are generally at their best when they do this for the sake of being funny. Like The Simpsons, Family Guy, South Park. None of them let anything that happens in an individual episode interfere with the status quo, at least most of the time, and do this so that the series can reach its top comedic potential by not beholding itself to anything but the barest minimum. And considering the popularity of all three shows, it's definitely a formula that works. And this is also proven to be the case in kids' shows as well, such as with SpongeBob SquarePants, just to give one example. No matter what state the characters are in when the episode ends, you can be rest assured they'll be absolutely fine by the start of the next one. Though, since it's an absurdist humor show in nature, it's pretty much a given that continuity wouldn't be the highest priority for the writers. But all that being said, comedy is really the only genre where negative continuity can work. Because comedy is a lot more about the gag, the short form joke before moving on to the next thing. So a format like that can and does most definitely make sense when used for that purpose if done right. But again, that's about the only time it can work, because in stories of different natures, especially dramas, it's all about building towards something. So if previous events are blatantly ignored, it can quickly feel as if the whole thing is amounting to nothing, unless handled very well. But as I just noted, in comedy shows, the joke is clearly what the whole thing is about rather than the plot. So little or no continuity is a lot more acceptable because it's not really about the story. But even then, if not used right, it can make pretty much any kind of show feel pointless. So either way, it can be a pretty tricky thing to pull off if one doesn't understand it. Okay, I think that's everything I had to say. So now I want to hear from all of you. Do you believe that negative continuity can be a good thing for TV shows to use as long as they know how to use it? Or do you believe it's something that should generally be avoided? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And just like always, you don't have to agree with anything I said in this video if you don't want to. You can feel any way you'd like about negative continuity and the TV shows that use it, and if you think I've got it all wrong, that's perfectly fine. And thank you all for watching. It is all very much appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.